Yeah. Hello, my friends. If you're ready for more terrifying stories, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe.
I've always been the kind of person who loves camping. Fresh air, quiet nights, starry skies. Nothing beats being away from the chaos of the city. So when my college friends suggested a weekend trip deep in the Smoky Mountains, I jumped at the chance. We didn't want a designated campground, no amenities, no people. Just us, the woods, and the promise of isolation. We arrived mid-afternoon, the sun low but warm, casting long, golden fingers through the trees. My friends, Katie, Sean, and Ben, were eager to set up camp. Ben, of course, insisted on bringing a portable speaker, which we argued over, but eventually left in the car when we realized there would be no service anyway. The clearing we found was perfect, a gentle slope, a small creek at the edge, and towering pines that blocked the road behind us. The first evening was pleasant. We built a fire, roasted some hot dogs, and laughed too loudly, telling stories that were half true and half exaggerated. As night fell, the forest seemed alive in ways I hadn't noticed during the day. The wind whispered through the trees, and shadows stretched unnaturally across the ground. I chalked it up to imagination. It was late when we went to bed. I couldn't sleep, though. There was something off. The creek's water sounded strange, like it was moving too quickly, rushing when it shouldn't. The trees groaned, though there was barely any wind. I kept thinking I saw movement at the edge of the clearing, shapes slipping between the pines, but every time I blinked, they were gone. Around midnight, I woke to a smell, metallic, coppery sharp. My stomach twisted. The fire was out, though we'd left it smoldering. I stepped out of the tent, shivering, and that's when I saw it. Footprints. Not just regular footprints. They were enormous, far too long for any person. Each step sunk into the soft earth, dragging slightly as though whatever made them was heavy and deliberate. They led in a circle around our campsite, then disappeared into the trees. I woke Katie and Sean quietly, trying not to panic Ben. Together, we scanned the darkness. We didn't hear anything at first, but then a figure emerged at the tree line. Tall, impossibly tall, hunched, its limbs long and thin. I could barely make out the face, if it had one, but the feeling of being watched, truly watched, paralyzed me. Sean whispered, "Maybe it's a hunter," but there were no lights, no movement, nothing human about it. It just stood there, watching, waiting. We decided to retreat into the tent, though the air felt heavy, suffocating. Every sound outside, snaps, rustles, even the water of the creek, made our hearts race. Hours passed. I couldn't tell if I slept or just dozed. When dawn broke, we cautiously peeked outside. The figure was gone. Relieved, but still shaken, we debated leaving. Ben wanted to stay, claiming it was probably just a bear. But Katie and I insisted we pack up. That's when we noticed something else. The trees weren't right. During the day, the forest looked normal. But at the edges of the clearing, near where the figure had been, the trees seemed distorted. Bark peeled in long strips, roots twisted unnaturally, and the air was heavy with the smell of rot. Sean touched one of the trees and hissed. The bark was cold, almost slimy, like wet skin. We decided to leave immediately. Hiking back to the car, we felt the forest closing in. The trail we'd taken to the clearing didn't seem familiar anymore. Twisting roots and brambles blocked our way, though the map and GPS confirmed we were moving in the right direction. Every few minutes, we caught glimpses of the figure or others like it between the trees. Sometimes one, sometimes many. Tall, thin, hunched. They never approached, but they never left either. They just watched. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, but the forest refused to end. Every clearing looked the same. Every tree seemed alive. Panic set in. My throat burned as I shouted, "This way!" But every direction looked identical, and the creek we had followed to reach the clearing was nowhere in sight. That's when I noticed the shadows. Even in daylight, they were too long, stretching unnaturally, and they moved against the light, shifting as though they had minds of their own. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, but it didn't stop. The shadows seemed to reach for us. Ben finally broke. "We should have never come here," he muttered. "Something's wrong with this place." Katie pointed ahead. "Look, there was a faint trail, just a depression in the dirt, winding deeper into the forest." We hesitated, but it was either follow it or stay lost forever. We followed. The trail led to a clearing I will never forget. It wasn't like any other. The trees formed a ring, blackened at the base as though scorched by fire, though we had no idea how. In the center lay a shallow pit filled with water, but it wasn't water. It reflected the sky like glass, yet it moved, rippling even though there was no wind. And in that reflection, we saw them. Dozens of figures, taller than men, some hunched, some standing straight, all staring at us. I stepped back. The others froze. The reflections shifted, not following our movements, but moving independently. Their shadows reached out of the pool, stretching toward us. The air grew cold, wet and heavy. The metallic smell returned, stronger, sharper, almost burning our noses. Something in me screamed to run, but my legs refused. Then, as if sensing our hesitation, the figures moved. Not out of the reflection, out of the forest. They didn't walk. They glided impossibly fast, soundless. They didn't attack, not yet. They merely surrounded us, circling, pressing closer, their eyes, if they had eyes, boring into our minds. Then the pit rippled violently. One figure emerged, taller than the rest, its limbs impossibly long. It raised an arm, or something like it, and the others paused. The water in the pit surged, spilling over the edges, yet it made no sound. I will never forget what happened next. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed time. One moment we were standing there, frozen, the figures surrounding us. The next I was alone. The clearing, the pit, the figures, they were gone. The trees stretched endlessly in every direction. I called for the others. Nothing. My voice felt swallowed by the forest. I ran, blindly, tripping over roots and stones. Hours or minutes passed. The sun hung in the sky, never moving. Then I saw the car, or at least what looked like it. I stumbled forward, collapsing against the driver's door. Inside, everything was normal, just as we had left it. The keys were in the ignition. My friend were gone. I drove home, shaking, muttering their names. I reported them missing. Search teams found nothing. Not a trace of the campsite, the trail, or the figures. Just me, in the car, in the middle of nowhere. Months later, I still have nightmares. Sometimes I wake to see the shadows moving in my bedroom, stretching against walls, always reaching. And sometimes, in mirrors, I swear I see figures, tall, thin, impossible figures, watching, waiting. I never go camping anymore. I don't hike. I don't spend time in the woods. And yet, I know somehow they're still out there, watching, waiting. The worst part, I realized something. They didn't take my friends. They only took time. Somewhere, somehow, they exist in the moments I can't remember, in a place I cannot follow. I am alone, but they are patient. And one day, they might let me find out where my friends really are. Until then, I live knowing that the forest is not just trees and wind. It's alive, it's patient, and it waits for anyone foolish enough to step too deep. I've spent most of my life in the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains, hiking, hunting, and sometimes getting lost in the thick forests that stretch from West Virginia down to Georgia. I knew the mountains were old. They weren't just old in the sense of age, but in the way the air and the land seem to remember everything that happened in them. They have a memory, and sometimes, I think, a mind of their own. I never believed the local legends until that summer, when something went wrong, and nothing has been the same since. I was 21, driving through the mountains alone in my old Chevy pickup, chasing a week of solitude. I needed it. College was draining me, and I thought a week off-grid in the hollows of North Carolina would be the perfect escape. I packed my tent, a sleeping bag, a few cans of food, and my grandfather's hunting rifle. He always warned me, the mountains are fine for work and wood, but don't wander where you don't belong. I didn't listen. I parked near an old logging trail near the Linville Gorge, a place I had hiked a few times as a teenager. The trailhead was almost invisible, hidden by years of growth, but I remembered the path. The first day was peaceful. The air was crisp, the forest alive with the smell of pine and damp earth. Birds sang, and deer grazed lazily along the trail. I set up camp near a creek that cut through the hollow, and I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. That night, though, I woke to a sound that made me question everything. It wasn't a scream or a growl, nothing recognizable. It was low, almost like the ground itself was vibrating, and it came from somewhere deep in the forest. I grabbed my rifle and shined my flashlight toward the sound, but I saw nothing. Just the same trees, the same moss-covered rocks. The sound stopped abruptly, as if it had never been there. The next day, I decided to follow the logging trail deeper into the mountains. I'd never been this far before. The path narrowed, twisted, and eventually disappeared altogether, leaving only the rough brush. I pressed on. That's when I first noticed the markers. Strange symbols carved into trees, roughly circular, jagged, like some ancient language. I shook it off, telling myself it was some prank by kids or old hunters marking territory. By the afternoon, the sun was obscured by a sudden fog that seemed unnaturally thick. My compass spun for no reason, and my GPS kept glitching. I realized I was lost, but not in the ordinary way. There was something about the forest that felt wrong, like the trees themselves had shifted while I wasn't looking. I decided to set up camp again, though every instinct in my body screamed not to. That night, the vibrations returned, stronger this time. I could feel them in my chest, deep, resonant like the pulse of the earth. Then I heard the whispers. They weren't voices. They were fragments, words I couldn't piece together. But one came clear, stay. I froze, heart pounding. I whispered back, who's there? No answer. I spent the rest of the night gripping my rifle, listening as the whispering grew fainter until the sun rose. On the third day, I decided I had to get out. I tried retracing my steps, but the forest refused to cooperate. Every ridge I climbed seemed to loop me back into the same hollow. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the fog at the edge of a clearing. It was not a person, not really. It was humanoid, tall and thin, with limbs too long for its body. Its skin looked like cracked bark, and its face, if it had one, it was hidden beneath layers of shadows and leaves. I froze. It raised a hand, slow and deliberate, pointing toward the deeper forest. I thought of running, but my feet wouldn't move. It was as if the mountain itself held me in place. Then, to my shock, the figure stepped backward into the fog and vanished. But the forest felt different. The air was heavier, and I realized something horrifying. The sound of the creek I had camped by, it was gone. The water, the familiar sounds, everything was altered. I was no longer in a place I recognized. Hours later, I stumbled across a small cabin hidden deep in the trees. Smoke curled from the chimney, but the building looked abandoned. I knocked. No response. I opened the door. Dust, cobwebs, broken furniture. Nothing alive. I felt a strange pull, a warmth in the back room. There, on the floor, was a bundle of old clothes and a journal. The journal was leather-bound, brittle with age. I opened it and realized it belonged to a man named Elias, who had lived decades ago in these mountains. His entries spoke of the Watchers, creatures that lived between the trees and time itself. He wrote about people who wandered off the paths, never returning, and how the mountains would fold around the lost ones, keeping them close, feeding on their fear. I felt a chill run down my spine. Reading his words, I realized the truth. The mountain was alive. It had rules, and I had broken them. I spent the next day trying to leave, but every attempt led me back to the cabin. I marked trees, left arrows, tried climbing ridges. Nothing worked. It was like the mountain was reshaping itself, hurting me. I began to accept something terrifying. I wasn't lost. I was chosen. That night, I heard the whispers again. Louder, clearer, not a threat, but an invitation. Join us. I understood then that the figure I had seen wasn't a single being. It was the mountain's given form. It had been watching me, learning me, and now it wanted me to stay. I considered fleeing, but something inside me, primal and resigned, knew I couldn't. Then I remembered something from Elias's journal, a method he claimed might free a person. Leave a piece of yourself behind, a symbol of your identity, and the mountain may let the rest of you go. Desperate, I tore off my shirt, carved my initials into a tree, and left a photo of my family tucked into the roots of an ancient oak. I walked away as fast as I could, my heart pounding. The forest seemed to resist at first, fog thickening, shadows shifting, but slowly I emerged onto a trail I recognized. The sunlight felt warmer than ever. The familiar creek, the mossy rocks, the bird calls, they were all back. I was free. I didn't stop running until I hit the nearest town. I never went back into the mountains after that. People ask why I don't hike anymore. I just say I lost interest. But sometimes when I drive past the mountains at dusk, I swear I see a figure of the tree-lean, tall, thin, motionless, watching, waiting, and I feel the pull again, subtle, like a thread tugging at my chest. I know it's still there, and I know the mountain remembers me. And I also know it's patient, because the Appalachians have always been patient. And one day, they will call me back. I didn't plan on going to the old Marrow Creek Hospital that night. Honestly, I didn't even know the place existed until I stumbled across it in a faded blog post buried in some forgotten corner of the internet. The post was short, almost a warning. Do not go inside. The building remembers. That was enough to draw me in. Curiosity has always been my weakness. It was late October when I arrived. The air was cold and damp, heavy with fog that rolled off the nearby river. The hospital sat on a hill, looming like a dark sentinel over the small town below. Its windows were shattered, and the brickwork was crumbling, streaked with decades of rain and neglect. Ivy crept up the walls, grasping as if trying to hold the building together. There was a feeling there, something in the air, like the place had been waiting for me. I parked my car at the edge of the overgrown driveway and approached on foot. The main entrance was boarded up, but one side door had been pried open years ago, leaving a narrow gap just big enough for me to squeeze through. The smell hit me immediately. Stale air mixed with mildew and something else, something metallic, faint but unmistakable. Inside, the hospital was a monument to decay. Hallways stretched ahead, dark and silent, the floors littered with debris. Rusted beds, broken wheelchairs, and crumbling plaster created a surreal landscape. I clicked on my flashlight, but it barely penetrated the shadows, and I felt the chill crawl down my spine. I moved slowly, documenting everything. I had my camera, but the lens seemed to distort the hallways, making them longer than they should be. I paused at a nurse's station, where patient files were scattered across a desk, yellowed with age. Flipping through one, I saw names, dates, and brief notes, so ordinary yet somehow haunting. Some names repeated across pages, always with unexplained gaps in dates, and notes that made no sense. Subject observed disappearing in corridor. Patient found standing in stairwell. No memory. I shivered and moved on. The further I went, the more I felt it, the sensation that someone or something was watching me. I rationalized it as paranoia at first, but then I noticed the shadows behaving oddly. They didn't move like shadows normally do. They seemed to cling, stretching toward me just at the corner of my vision. I reached what had been the psychiatric wing. The doors were broken, hanging on rusted hinges. Inside, the rooms were small, clinical, and suffocating. Some still had beds, their springs exposed, mattresses rotting. In one room, I found a small chair tipped on its side. On the floor near were scratches, deep and jagged, like nails had gouged the linoleum. I heard the first whisper then. It was faint, almost a breath, coming from somewhere down the hall. Leave now. I froze, telling myself it was the wind or my imagination. I moved on, but the whisper followed, louder, more insistent. I wanted to run, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, propelled me deeper. At the end of the hall, I found the stairwell leading to the basement. The hospital's dark secrets were said to be there. I descended carefully. The basement smelled worse than the upper floors, a mixture of rot and iron, thick in the air. The walls were lined with old lockers, some open, revealing medical tools, jars filled with strange specimens and scattered papers. I found a door that led to a long corridor. The air felt heavier here. My flashlight flickered, and I thought I saw movement, shapes shifting at the edges of light. I swallowed hard and moved forward. It was then I realized the whispers weren't coming from the building itself. They were coming from the photographs scattered along the floor. Old black and white images of patients and staff, their faces blurred, scratched out, eyes hollow. As I passed, I could have sworn some of them turned to look at me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was tired. But then something impossible happened. The hallway seemed to stretch. The walls elongated. The ceiling rose higher, and the exit I thought I had seen vanished. Every door I tried was either blocked or led to another endless hallway. Panic set in. I ran. The air grew colder, my breath visible in the dim light. And that's when I saw them. Figures. At first, I thought they were shadows, but they were solid, tall, gaunt, and pale, their faces featureless. They didn't move toward me, didn't chase. They just stood, watching, waiting. I ran past, and for a moment, it seemed like they were everywhere, multiplying behind me. I stumbled into a room that looked like an operating theater. The ceiling had collapsed in parts, but I could make out rusted surgical tables and instruments strewn across the floor. On one table lay a patient file, open. The name caught my eye, Abigail Marrow. I didn't know why, but I picked it up. The pages described experiments, attempts to prolong life, to manipulate perception, to teach the building to see. The notes were written in a frantic hand, interspersed with warnings. Do not allow the observers to awaken. Observers. That's what the notes called them. And suddenly I understood. They weren't shadows, not exactly. They were something else. Something tied to the building itself. The hospital had been teaching them, raising them from whatever liminal space existed here, feeding them fragments of human presence. And now, I was in their territory. I dropped the file. The figures moved, slowly, deliberately, closing in from all sides. I ran, turning corner after corner, the whispers rising into a chorus of unintelligible words. Doors that should have led outside led to the same dark corridors, and stairwells looped endlessly. I tripped and fell, scraping my hands on the concrete. My flashlight went out. I was in total darkness. My heart pounded as the whispers grew louder, overlapping, almost tangible. And then I saw light, a faint, golden light through a crack in the wall. I crawled toward it, hands trembling. The light led to a small room, almost like a shrine, filled with photographs, candles long burned out, and a single mirror. I approached the mirror cautiously. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't just me. Behind my image, shadowy figures pressed close, faceless, countless, their presence oppressive. I tried to scream. Nothing came out, and then my reflection moved independently. It smiled. And that's when I realized the truth. The hospital didn't want to kill me. It wanted to keep me, to make me part of it, part of the observers. I saw it then, clearly, the corridor I thought I had entered, the endless hallways, the basements, all of it was the hospital's mind, its body, and I had walked straight inside. I had only one option. I reached toward the mirror, instinctively touching the glass, and felt my reflection press back. Not solid, but cold like water. I pulled. The mirror didn't break. It yielded. I stepped through. I emerged in the parking lot. The hospital sat on the hill, silent, seemingly abandoned again. No broken windows, no ivy, no signs of decay. It looked normal, too normal. The fog had cleared. The stars were bright. My car was where I had left it. I thought I was safe. I thought I had escaped. But then, when I glanced down at my camera, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The photos I had taken inside the hospital. Each one showed me differently. In some, my eyes were empty, hollow like the patient's. In others, faceless figures loomed behind me, their presence undeniable. And in one final photo, one I hadn't taken, I saw myself standing at the entrance, smiling, holding a sign that said, "I am home now." I dropped the camera. My hands were shaking. I tried to rationalize, to tell myself it was a trick of light, a malfunction. But deep down, I knew the truth. The hospital hadn't let me go. Not really. It had marked me, tethered me, in a way that no one could see. I left town the next morning, never looking back. But sometimes, late at night, I catch glimpses of shadows moving just beyond the corner of my vision. My reflection sometimes lingers a moment too long, smiles a moment too wide. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that Marrow Creek Hospital is waiting. And one day, it will call me back. Until then, I walk among the living, but part of me belongs to the building now, a silent observer, waiting, watching, tethered forever to a place that remembers everything. And maybe, just maybe, one day, it will want more than a part of me. I've always loved the outdoors, or at least I thought I did. There's a certain satisfaction in hiking through the Appalachians and watching the sun sift through towering oaks and maples, in smelling the wet earth after a storm. That was before the trip that made me reconsider every instinct I'd ever trusted in the woods. It started as a simple plan. My buddy Jason and I had mapped out a 3-day camping trip in a remote section of the Appalachian Trail, far from main roads, far from anyone who could hear a scream. The drive-in was long, the kind of winding mountain roads that force you to focus so hard that the world outside your windshield disappears. By the time we parked, dusk had settled in, a gray-purple haze over the peaks. The campsite was perfect, or at least it seemed so at first. A small clearing, enough space for our tent, a little creek running nearby, and thick forest surrounding us on all sides. We pitched the tent quickly, laughing at our clumsy coordination, the kind of laughter you tell yourself is brave when it masks a small fear of being utterly alone. The first night passed quietly. We had a small fire, roasted some sausages, and told stories. Nothing scary, just the usual tales of past misadventures. But sometime after midnight, I woke up. At first, I thought I was dreaming. There was a faint smell, like something burnt mixed with wet leaves. Then I heard it, a whisper, so faint that I thought it had come from my own mind. But when I nudged Jason awake, he heard it too. "I think someone's out there," I said. My voice sounded ridiculous even to me, high-pitched and uncertain. Jason shook his head. "Probably an animal. Just don't move too much." But it wasn't an animal. The whispers came again, more insistent, drifting on the night air in a pattern too deliberate to be random. Then came the movement, shadows flitting between the trees, too fast to identify, too quiet to track. My heart started hammering. We grabbed our flashlights and stepped out, trying to convince ourselves we'd seen nothing. But then we did. Marks on the trees, jagged scratches in the bark, fresh footprints in the mud, long and narrow, with toes that bent at odd angles. I wanted to laugh, to shake it off as some prank, but even Jason went quiet, staring at the ground like he couldn't believe what he saw. "Let's just go back to the tent," he whispered. I agreed, though some irrational part of me wanted to follow the footprints, to see where they led. We made it back, but the whispers didn't stop. They circled our tent, soft, persistent, forming words we couldn't understand. Morning brought relief, if only because daylight tends to make fear manageable. But as soon as we began packing our gear, we realized something was off. Our backpacks had been moved, not far, just enough to be unsettling, and small things were missing. Our map, a bottle of water, a pocket knife. Items we would have noticed instantly if someone had taken them deliberately. But there was no sign of a person. No footprints except our own. Jason tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was kids, he said. Hikers messing with us. I didn't believe him. The woods felt wrong, alive in a way that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. We decided to hike out early, following the trail we had used to enter, but the forest seemed to shift. The landmarks we had memorized, the twisted pine, the moss-covered rock, the creek bend, none of them were where they should be. The trail curved in impossible ways, as if the forest itself had rearranged while we slept. By late afternoon, we were lost. Our GPS had no signal. Our compass spun erratically. Panic began to creep in. Jason tried to stay calm, suggesting we climb a ridge to get a better view, but the higher we went, the stranger it got. The trees were thicker, darker, their shadows too dense. Mist curled around the trunks like fingers, and I could swear I saw figures standing just beyond our vision, retreating when I looked directly at them. And then we heard it, a deep, resonant hum, vibrating through the earth beneath our feet. It wasn't music, it wasn't language, it was something older, something that didn't belong in the realm of humans. It made my teeth ache, my bones thrum. Jason froze. "Do you hear that?" "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. It's coming from down there." I pointed toward a depression in the earth, barely noticeable under the thick undergrowth. A small hollow, like the mouth of a cave, hidden among rocks and ferns. Against my better judgment, we approached. The hum grew louder, vibrating through our shoes. The smell hit again, wet iron, decay, something acidic and sour. The hollow wasn't deep, maybe 15 feet, but shadows pooled inside as if the darkness itself had weight. And then we saw it. Eyes. Thousands of tiny, glowing eyes scattered across the walls of the hollow, blinking slowly. Shapes pressed against the darkness. Limbs bent in ways no animal should move. The whispers rose again, forming words I could almost understand. "Stay, stay, stay." Jason grabbed my arm. "We leave. Now." But I couldn't move. Something was pulling me toward the hollow, a force that wasn't physical but demanded obedience. I stumbled and the shadows shifted. One shape, larger than the rest, moved forward, limbs stretching impossibly, its glowing eyes fixed on me. And then silence. I woke up hours later, lying on the trail, Jason nowhere in sight. The sun was low, the forest quiet. My pack was at my side, untouched except for one thing, a small, smooth stone in my hand. Dark, almost black, with a faint, pulsing glow beneath its surface. I didn't remember picking it up. I ran until the forest ended and the road appeared, my lungs burning, my mind screaming. I flagged down a car, told them I'd been lost, couldn't explain the scratches, the eyes, the whispers, nothing. But the stone, I kept it. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. There was something familiar about it, something that called to me when the wind blew just right. Weeks passed. I reported Jason missing, but the authorities found no trace of him. No footprints, no signs of struggle, nothing. And I started noticing things, shadows at the edges of my vision, whispers when I was alone, a tugging sensation in my chest whenever I held the stone. One night, I awoke to find the stone glowing brighter than ever. The whispers were loud now, forming words I could understand clearly. "Stay joined, see." My bedroom felt impossibly large, stretching into shadows that weren't mine. The air shimmered, and I could see faint outlines of the forest hollow, the glowing eyes, the shapes pressing against the walls, waiting. I realized then that it hadn't been a coincidence. The forest hadn't released us. It had chosen me, and I understood something terrifying. The stone was a tether. Jason hadn't disappeared. He had joined. The forest doesn't kill, not exactly. It claims. It rearranges reality to suit itself, pulling you in until there's nothing left but the hollow and the eyes and the whispering voices that speak only to the ones who remain. I left my apartment the next morning. I walked to the woods, the stone warm in my pocket, vibrating like a heartbeat. As I approached the trailhead, the whispers returned, gentle now, coaxing me forward. The forest was waiting. I stepped onto the path and felt it close behind me, the air thickening, shadows stretching. And I walked in, knowing I would not walk out. The Appalachians are beautiful, majestic, peaceful. They hide their secrets well. But if you ever see someone walking the trails alone, talking to themselves, clutching a dark stone that pulses in your hand, remember this: the forest is patient, and it never forgets.
If you're still here, you're brave. Support the channel with a like, comment, and subscription.